Welcome, everyone, to the fifth episode of our Business Architecture Meets Sustainability webinar series. How can organizations leverage business architecture to enhance and accelerate their sustainability efforts? That's what the whole series is essentially about, and well, what we've been discussing since our very first episodes, about 1.5 years ago. Business architecture can help make sustainability measurable, actionable, and visible. That's what we concluded in our very first session. Based on the holistic view of the organization and its ecosystem, which it provides. And based on that, we've been exploring various themes in more detail throughout the previous episodes. We had a session focusing on sustainability reporting and how it may be facilitated by the use of business architecture. We spent 2 episodes on the transition to a circular economy and how business architecture may contribute to this. Well, and now it's time to discuss the role that business architecture might play to help shape the path towards sustainable IT. So, well, who's with us today? It's our regular cast with Whynde, business architecture and strategy execution, thought leader and community builder, and Daniel, a sought-after sustainability expert and advisor. And I'm really thrilled that we again managed to get another panelist on board today. It's Niklas Sundberg. Niklas is the author of the Sustainable IT Playbook for Technology Leaders and is a board member of sustainableIT.org, a non-profit organization dedicated to advancing global sustainability through technology leadership. He's a chief digital officer at Kuehn & Nagel, a global transport and logistics company, and was previously chief information officer and global head of enterprise architecture at Assa Abloy. Niklas, many thanks for being with us today. I think I can speak on behalf of all of us. It's really an honor to have the chance to have this conversation with you today.
Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here and really looking forward to this discussion in the next hour. So
right.
Let's get started.
Yeah, finally, my name is also Daniel, and I'm the founder and managing director of Across the Net, and I'm hosting today's event. Yeah. And as Niklas just said, let's get started. Now that we've introduced today's protagonists, let's shed light on business architecture and sustainable IT. So what do these topics have to do with one another? How could they come together in a reasonable way? So let's first set the foundation for the discussion that we're going to have later in this session, having a look at the sustainable IT side first. Daniel, to get the ball rolling, would you mind sharing a few introductory thoughts on sustainable IT and its significance from an overall sustainability perspective? Why is it so relevant? What's the impact of IT on the environment? So just very briefly to set the stage, and then, yeah, you can basically hand over to Niklas to let him share his view on sustainable IT and maybe the current state of practice in organizations nowadays.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Thanks, Daniel. Happy to be here in this great session and topics, because it combines both of my key interests, let's say, since I've been working 20 years in the digital transformation in big corporates in Germany like Rewe and AXA. So that's where I come from, and where I'm now since 3 years is sustainability, and how do companies get that sustainability thing going? What does that mean? How do they implement right strategy and all these things? So it's the perfect combination, let's say, for me. And I want to start with an introduction on first thing, what is sustainability about? But that's just a short part, because I expect most of the people who are here have an idea about that, since we've been talking about this quite a couple of times already. And I will now share my screen. So you should see this picture first, the SDGs, the 17 SDGs that have been founded in 2015 by the United Nations. So meaning all, basically all of the states, except for just a few, who said, okay, we need to achieve until 2030. That was the goal, and in some SDGs we're on a good way, and most we aren't. To be honest, we want to achieve all these 17 goals until 2030. And what you can see is, prominent topics like climate action is here, biodiversity, life below water, life on land, but also very important social topics like no poverty, zero hunger, quality education, gender equality, etc., etc. So all these things are out there since 2015, and we call it the global definition of sustainability, because that's what basically all the states in the world agreed on, all the countries and politicians said that's what we want to achieve. So if we look at what organizations can contribute to sustainability, then they should always find the connection to these 17 goals, because that's the global framework we are working on as humans, that we want to achieve all these 17 things. So that's the context we are in if we talk about sustainability, because we see many definitions in the world, but that's kind of my best favorite one, since it's the global one. And what I want to look at now is, let's call it the curse and the blessing of digitalization for sustainability, because it's both. If we look at what IT brings to the world, then of course we see a lot of blessing, let's say, and we will look at that as well. But to be honest, we have a lot of curse in it as well. And I want to give you some examples for these two perspectives to highlight our view on why it's also a curse. So let's start with that. Why is IT and digitalization a curse for sustainability? I know there's this number for Germany, but it will be quite similar in the global north, let's say. So there are a lot of CO2 emissions per person per year for our digital lifestyle. So in Germany, this is kind of 8% of my total year CO2 emissions as one person. It comes from my digital lifestyle. That does not sound much, 8%, but it's a lot if we look at where it comes from. And it's of course my devices, but it's also all the streaming, the data transfer that happens. So that's one figure we see. If we look at the global picture, it's even worse, you could say, because more than 4% of all the global CO2 emission come from digitalization, and the trend is rising sharply. And there are studies that say it will be up to 8% in 2025. And just to give you a good qualification what that means, the global flight sector in the world is just 3%. So IT, you can say, with all the stuff, is already higher than all the flight emissions in the world, and will be a lot higher until 2025. So there's simply a big footprint to what we do around IT and digitalization. And it does not really sound sustainable if we see figures like that coming from a book, Worldwide Waste, it's called, where Gary McGovern's found out that 80% of all digital data is no longer used after initial storage. So we produce digital data once, use it once, store it somewhere, and that's it. And that is, if you look at that figure, not really sustainable, because all that data is stored somewhere. Storing somewhere needs resources, and that does not only mean resources for the hard disk, for example, but also resources for backups being made, for data being transferred in, especially if you look at cloud data that's been replicated quite a few times. So all that needs a lot of energy in the end, and that energy results in a lot of CO2 emissions, although that's decreasing with all the renewable energies, but still it's not right to just stick to that and accept that. And Jens Krüger said once, who's quite famous in Germany, you could say, in one famous paper we have, Geo, that our digital lifestyle is simply not future-proof in its current form. So it can't stay like that, like we do it now. So that's kind of some examples around the curse point. But let's look at the other perspective, and there are a lot of examples I could bring here, why we need all that modern digitalization and IT for our lifestyle and not our lifestyle, and also to be able to solve the challenges we face in sustainability. So let's look at just one example, because then I want to hand over to Niklas. What is sustainable IT about? And let's look at just one example, which is, you could say this, if we look at the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, simulations where people think about and not just think about, but also simulate with a lot of data and digital infrastructure they use. How will climate change the world, and how will it develop if we do this and that? If our politicians decide this and that, how will that change? How will that change different regions in the world? All of that needs a lot of digital infrastructure, modern IT, programming, etc., etc. So we need these things to be able to solve the challenges we are facing there. And without such IT being used for challenges like this, or for solving the challenges, we wouldn't be able to probably do that at all. So that's a kind of one example for the blessing it brings to sustainability. So without modern IT, we wouldn't be able to cope with that. And that's my high-level introduction I want to give, and then hand over to Niklas to look at what does sustainable IT mean, and etc. Yeah, thanks.
Great. So very good segue into this. And so what I want to share with you really is sort of and let's start with the definitions of what I would define as sustainability in IT and sustainability by IT. And then also equally important, the social aspects as well. I think one great thing of working in IT is that what we do is we make global impact, so to say, because everything in IT is really scalable on a global scale. So that's obviously really, really powerful. But just to set the terminology right, so to say, the footprint sustainability in IT is everything that we produce as technology leaders, as companies, when we leverage technology as data centers, cloud, the hardware that we buy, network equipment, laptops, computers, and so forth. The bigger opportunity is sustainability by IT, where you can leverage sort of the handprint when you put technology and create new products and solutions, and you're actually working towards solving sustainability challenges. So I think obviously that is the curse and the opportunity, so to say. What we might not talk so much about here in Europe compared to the US is also IT for society, or tech for good, in terms of how do we connect IT to also be a positive force in the community, for example? How can we ensure that we can leverage that social contract that we have and also extend that into our communities and so forth? But equally important in our supply chain as well, to make sure that we only work with suppliers that have fair working conditions, that the manufacturing and the equipment that we buy is also sustainably manufactured, and also as we see with new regulations and also the need to become a lot more circular, we need to ensure that we use a lot more non-virgin material. So I think that the S in sustainability in IT, sustainable IT, is also equally important. So let's look at a few examples, so to say. And this is something that's readily available as well. You can go to sustainablement.org. This is something that we put out to enable technology leaders, because we get a lot of questions in terms of this. Where do we get started? Where is a good place to start? How can I frame this? Because I'm starting to get all of these tough questions from the board, from the executive management team. We also have emergent legislation in EU with the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I will share a bit more about that because I think that's very important to pay attention to. But if we look about environmental sustainability in IT, is really what we can do in terms of how we consume data centers, the cloud, for example. But equally important is how we develop the software going forward. One great example is Scania, for example, the global truck company, that they realize suddenly that they have 2,000 mechanical engineers, but they now have 3,000 software engineers working on developing new solutions for electrifying the trucks on the road, so to say. And they saw that if we don't put a focus on this, we're actually going to surpass our emissions on our existing infrastructure just with the software that we are developing, so to say. So they saw this huge spike, and they started developing tools to be able to measure this and to empower software engineers to be able to take responsibility for what they are consuming in terms of energy, map that to what CO2 emission that is, and so forth. Prolonging your hardware is an important factor, so to say. And just to give you a few examples, a laptop from Dell over a 4-year life cycle roughly consumes 320 kilos of CO2 over a 4-year life cycle. An Apple iPhone, roughly around 70 kilos over a 3-year life cycle. So it might not look that much, but then when you add it up on a company perspective, this is actually over a 10-year period, it's actually 50,000 tons of CO2 for a company with roughly 30,000 employees. So this really applies to any company around the world. So here, for sure, both to apply sustainability in IT, but also the S factor to also put pressure on providers to become a lot more circular and to reduce that CO2 footprint in your value chain, so to say. And that brings me to my next one, is really the IT vendor management and procurement, to really understand your supply chain and to work with those suppliers that also can fulfill your sustainability goals in your direction going forward, and what have you. When it comes to e-waste, which or IT asset disposition, which is the more common term in the business, so to say, that is really to when a company or a person has reached the end of use of that asset, to responsibly be able to pass it on, so to say, to find a second home for that asset. And what I've seen in the past, at least when we send back assets, is that even though the assets are 4 years old, they can repurpose them, they can refurbish them, and they can find a second life for them, and they can live on for another 3, 4, 5 years. And for every year you prolong the IT assets, you're actually saving and reducing 25% CO2. So it has a big impact to really work with the circular partners in this space, so to say. I'm not going to go through all of these because then you have probably seen the screen and you've read through these as well. But I think also there are obviously a lot of great opportunities to leverage IT to bring sustainability to your company, so to say, with more energy efficient buildings, effective use of resource management and so forth. And then also across all industries, there are also a lot of new opportunities, obviously, and legislations like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. So here are some of these examples that I defined in the previous slide, so to say. So CSRD and why this is important. And I think, why do I mention CSRD? Because I think this is your best lever, so to say, to really get things going in your company, in your organization, and so forth. Because this is similar to GDPR, which was enacted a few years ago. This, you actually have to prove your viability around this. With GDPR, it was more if someone comes and knock on your door, and then you have to prove that what you're doing with the data and what type of data you store. Here, every company over 500 employees or 500 million in annual revenue has to comply with the CSRD. And this starts actually with January 1st of next year. So by 2025, end of 2025, you need to have one baseline year, which is 2024 and 2025, to start reporting on this. And this not only includes scope 1 and 2, which is sort of the easier ones to get your arms around, but it also includes scope 3. And especially within IT and the tech industry that most of us are working in this forum, we need to start getting answers from our vendors like Microsoft, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and so forth, in terms of what is the emission of my users or our licenses that we are running on this. I know that the vendors are working on this and they're trying to get this out. I think one challenge as well is with the cloud providers, which I think is worth mentioning, is that they interpret this in a different way as well. So if you talk to Amazon, they only include scope 2. They only look at the energy. They don't look at any of the hardware that they're actually utilizing, which is the embodied carbon. So you really need to understand as well and really ask some tough questions in terms of what are you actually showing here? Is it the scope 2 or scope 3 or so to say, because it's not standardized, so forth. And if we come in and talking sort of the intersection of business architecture and sustainability and the importance of really connecting everything from strategy and transformation all the way to your technical architecture. And in order to be successful in this area, I think it's very, very important to start from the top, to really start defining your objectives. And how can you link your objectives, like you heard earlier in the talk about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, the 17. How can we connect them? How do we bring these to life in terms of connecting these business capabilities? What are the gaps in our business capabilities? What capabilities do we need to build? What processes do we need to change, so to say? And which are the user groups that's going to be impacted? Is this a change that's only going to happen in Europe, or is it going to happen in the US? Or is this something that we need to happen all over the world, so to say? Once you have that, once you have sort of defined your outline of your change, mapped out your assets versus your target, and Whynde, you can for sure elaborate a lot more on that in terms of connecting this all the way from top to the bottom with the technical architecture. Then you can really start looking at your baseline of your IT landscape. And then you can start looking at how can you rationalize applications? What type of new digital capabilities can we build? Do we have existing capabilities on premise that we can buy as a service, for example? What type of migration strategy can we apply to be able to reduce sort of our footprint? And here, I think, at least as a technology leader, I think this is also very important to call out. Here, we don't have a sort of nexus of forces where they're competing against each other. Cost and sustainability is actually working towards and parallel with each other, because if you're rationalizing applications, you're also reducing cost, and you're also impacting the amount of hardware that you need, the amount of compute, and so forth. So this is really a great example where they are really aligned together. I also have to call out AI, unfortunately, because I also described that in my book. And I think especially over the last year, this sort of has been a bit of competing forces, because everybody's suddenly racing to develop AI capabilities across the world. Microsoft, for example, have made a commitment that they are going to be water positive by 2030. But then if you read their latest sustainability report, you can also see that they increased the water usage of 32% in just 1 year. And this is in liters, is 6.4 billion liters of water, which is a tremendous amount. And just to put this in perspective, would fill up 2,500 Olympic-sized pools of water. So it's not only the energy consumption, it's also the scarcity of water that also becoming a big problem. And for those that follow Microsoft and OpenAI closely, you would know that they build a lot of data centers out in Iowa. So you have agriculture, you have cows, and then you have data centers. So here, the municipality of Iowa and the city of Des Moines is actually saying that you can't build anymore now. We can't even provide water for our constituents anymore. So this is also becoming a very, very tangible problem in terms of water scarcity, so to say. So use this framework, connect this to how Whynde would connect this with driving business transformation and change. And this, hopefully you get an initial sort of link in terms of how you connect business architecture with sustainability. So that was my brief introduction, and over to you.
Fantastic. Thanks both for such a tremendous landscape, right, that you've laid here in sharing such expertise. So I'll share some food for thought to get us started on business architecture and sustainable IT, and we'll go from there. So just give me 1 minute to share. Okay. All right. So I know we have been sharing in previous episodes, but what is business architecture and how can it help in this space we're talking about? So business architecture is a holistic view of an organization and the ecosystem in which it operates. And that is actually an entirely refreshing view, right? We have a lot of fragmented views of our organizations and ecosystems, but this is a view of the whole. And what makes business architecture so unique is that it is a shared vocabulary. It's a shared mental model of how we see the world that transcends organizational structures, products, geographies, channels, everything. And it's entirely business focused and business owned, and it's high level in detail. So it gives us the forest, not the trees, though it does connect to all the details. For example, all the system applications, all the processes, things like that. It's sort of the scaffolding that connects everything in the business and technology environments. And like any blueprint, business architecture is made up of multiple different views. So, Niklas, you've already highlighted the capability as one of the most reusable components and connectors here in this ecosystem. And as you can see, value streams, put them in context. We can connect to strategies, initiatives, regulations, and policies, our stakeholders, products, systems, and so on. And from a sustainability perspective, I like to think about business architecture as sort of this couple sides here. And one is that it allows us to do intentional design of our organizations, starting at a macro level. All right, we've talked about this before in terms of taking a look at blueprints to design for circularity or sustainable business models. And as I mentioned, the key thing here, which is particularly relevant to this conversation, is that business architecture is oriented around these reusable business components, these capabilities, right? These reusable abilities that an organization has, like managing customer information, making payments, designing products, things like that. So we'll come back to that in just a bit. And then the other side is business architecture, along with IT architecture and many other disciplines, helps us to translate change. So when we design or redesign something, we actually need to be coordinated about how do we get those ideas into action. And again, orienting around these capabilities, we target enhancements to people, process, information, and technology around those capabilities to get idea into action. And some of the ideas that we're talking about are pretty big, right? At a lot of scale. So this can be tremendously helpful. And business architecture, because it's this blueprint, right, of the entire organization that we all agree to, business language we understand, and that gives us a mechanism to embed sustainability throughout an organization, through its design, through its investments, through its initiatives. So Niklas, just to pick up on a little bit of what you shared already, I love the alignment. And in your book, which is a fantastic book, by the way, it's a Bible in this space. One of the statements that I really like that resonated, you say, your sustainable IT strategy should be a subset of your complete IT strategy and your entire sustainability strategy.
Yeah.
So just to kind of put some of these ideas together, starting with the business strategy and business sustainability strategy, I have a footnote over there because that does disturb me a little bit, because I think sustainability should be fully embedded into strategy, design, operations, but we're in an interim state, so we have a subset here. And an organization's business architecture can help us to translate all of that strategy into coordinated action. And the IT strategy, of course, will have components in its own right, but also inheriting to support the business strategy. And the IT sustainability strategy, again, tied back to that, and the business sustainability strategy, the IT architecture helping to interpret that and move it into action in alignment with the business architecture. And together, business and IT architecture guiding what should our initiatives be doing. And this is also useful because our organizations are making a lot of other change that may not be sustainability related. So again, the capabilities in the business and IT architecture working together can help us to say, hey, we're trying to do this to improve sustainability performance with this capability, but we have another thing working on that same capability that may be at odds, or we need to coordinate or have some conversations. So yeah, and to Niklas's point, important tie in the business and IT architecture, that capability and application. So I'll just share back to, again, the framework here from your book. I've just added a few ideas to throw it out there, and then I'll show a couple pictures and end with some thoughts. But just anybody want to jump in? Niklas, I just see you're off mute. Anything you wanted to add?
No, I'm excited to see what's next. So.
I love it. Awesome. Well, from a business architecture perspective, and I'm particularly thinking first in this sustainability in IT, it gives us the business lens and business ownership to guide things like application portfolio management decisions and priorities, right? So both Daniel and Niklas have really pointed out sort of this proliferation and the impact that has. So with the business lens, with the capability lens, as I'll show you an example in just a bit, being able to see where do we have application redundancy, and what does that mean to the business context and the business priority? And how can we reduce that proliferation of application and data and hardware? And also putting the business ownership around capabilities, which really gets our business people involved and makes it a full organization, executive board matter. We can also, already referred to, but we can also be proactive about preventing these things in the future by, for example, in our initiative planning, in our investment process, and in procurement, making sure that, again, with the business lens, we're not creating this redundancy, and that we can also work sustainability goal consideration in, again, with this capability as that linchpin there. And now moving over to the handprint and the heart print as well. This sustainability by IT, I absolutely love this idea. And I think business architecture is a key enabler of that, because I've shown it in previous episodes, but I'll show again. If we, for example, look at our entire landscape of capabilities that our organization has, and look at what are the sustainability considerations or metrics or goals behind them, that gives us a place where we can directly turn to say, what should we target? For example, in the book you mentioned sustainable sourcing and manufacturing. There's a certain set of capabilities that we can turn right to as the levers to change that. And lastly, not just an idea anyway, business architecture provides business canvases to help us redesign and reimagine products and services, sustainable business models and entire ecosystems, right? So things like moving to a good and now offering it as a service, or even being able to map out that entire circular IT hardware management ecosystem and make sure that everybody is working together. So just two pictures to bring these ideas into action. This is a real example. We won't worry too much. This is all the layers at once, so it's a lot to interpret. But what you're looking at is the capability map for an organization. So it is the entire organization on a page at a very high level. And the gold and blue capabilities have been rated by the business leaders as those which are most important for competitive advantage and strategic support. So those are, from the business lens, the ones we are most concerned about. Doesn't mean they're not all important. And then tying the applications to those capabilities, you can see we have some redundancy in a lot of places where you see those boxes and those numbers, right? Those are the number of applications that are supporting those capabilities. So for one of those real key differentiators that's also customer facing, we have 126 applications there. And there's also some ratings around application risk as well. So you can kind of see, instead of looking at this world of applications, we can look at it through the business lens, see what's important, see it at that bird's eye view, and have business leaders that have ownership for these capabilities, helping us to make decisions on how we address this. Just briefly embedding sustainable thinking into yes,
and
sir.
maybe just to add to that as well, like rather than just to augment this as well, with the risk rating or the impact, you can actually also put what the CO2 footprint per application is as well, so to say, to have that to not only connect it to risk, impact, or cost, but also sort of the sustainability impact of these applications, because I think that's equally important to make those decisions in terms of what is the future going forward for this portfolio.
Absolutely. And of course, you heat map, right? The aggregation of that. That's brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And with these capabilities, right, as a view of our organization, there's just a little blowout over there. We can think about, for our organization, what are the sustainability considerations. That's an example for some things we might be considering around products. And again, having specific metrics and specific considerations, these are examples. But if we want to target something like sustainable sourcing and manufacturing, we're going to turn right to things like agreement management, product management, material management, operation, transportation, and so on and so on. And so one last thought for me, and then I'll turn it back to you, Daniel, Simon, for conversation. I think Daniel and Niklas, you've both shared a lot of really good points. Daniel, I liked your curse and blessing. And Niklas, I really liked, I was riffing on the same thing that I picked up in your book. And where it may seem like there's a paradox here, or people may initially think sustainability takes more time, more effort, more money. At the end of the day, as we've talked in previous episodes, there is so much opportunity, and even business opportunity, not just, world-changing opportunity in doing that, new products, new markets, and so on. In this sustainable IT space, as we've said, is very much the same. So these same things that help us to achieve our sustainability goals in sustainable IT are the exact same things that we're already trying to achieve as a business to save cost and get the organizational ability to change and change again. So with that, over to you.
Thank you very much, Whynde. On point as always. So maybe to start off the discussion, back to Daniel and Niklas, based on what we just heard in terms of, well, the role that business architecture might play in the sustainable IT context. Is that something that sort of resonates with your view on sustainable IT and on what it might need to overcome many challenges in turning, well, sustainable IT into reality in organizations nowadays? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, for sure. I can start. I even saw a comment here in the chat. I recognize the LeanIX data model, and for sure it is LeanIX data model, because the person that wrote the case study in the book is actually Andre Christ, who is the founder of LeanIX. And and that was the whole motivation to add that into the book, because I think this really, really fits perfectly together in terms of how you connect strategy and transformation to the technical architecture all the way down, so to say. So very, very perfect fit for business architecture and sustainability.
Yeah, thanks, Whynde, and Niklas and Daniel, of course, as well. But I want to come back to one point you mentioned, Whynde, in your slides, and that fits good to a comment from Rameshwar. I'm seeing in the chat on the materiality assessment. Oh, difficult word. And your slide, when he was showing the mapping of sustainability in IT, sustainability by IT, IT for society, the handprint, etc. And there was one point on it, the last one, which stated provides business canvases to redesign and reimagine products and services, business models and ecosystems. And this point, I want to stress it because it's a maturity level that most companies, unfortunately, are not yet in it. So they are stuck somewhere on the way to this, but they have not analyzed and assessed well the materiality which comes from looking at their products. What do they sell? What do they produce? What kind of services do they offer? And mapping what does sustainability will change in these products, service offers, etc. So I really like stressing that point that you brought up, Whynde, where business architecture can help understanding, coming from the materiality assessment, what's really important, what are the big issues we can work on and we should work on, we need to work on to become a sustainable company. And that's more not how we do things, but what we offer, what we sell, what we produce, and how can that change, and how is business architecture an enabler for addressing these changes on business models, products, etc. So that's really, really important because most companies aren't there yet, unfortunately.
So maybe to get this reinforced, what you just mentioned, Daniel, let's maybe expand on this a little more and wonder about why sustainable IT and business architecture practices might ultimately be, well, such a good match. Yeah? What do you think? Is there anything that they generally seem to have in common, maybe in regard to perspective or, let's say, mindset? Any thoughts on this?
Absolutely.
Anyone of you?
Yeah. Niklas.
Yeah, for sure. I think, looking at the next decade, this is our biggest challenge that we have ahead of us, so to say. And as architects working in tech, we're always trying to look to solve business problems. This is a very, very challenging business problem, but also for governments, for countries, and so forth. So to really have this holistic view in terms of having this direction of travel, I think is pivotal. It's paramount that you have that, because I think also it can be a bit overwhelming to dig into both architecture but also sustainability and to really understand the direction of travel, because it feels like there's so much information out there, for example, but very, very little progress. But then when you really drill down to some key areas, for example, we've had some black swan events in Europe in the last 24, 36 months with the pandemic, with the energy crisis, the war of Ukraine. But then also under the surface, you also see that we have created tremendous amount of renewable energy, so to say. And now we're already on track to have more renewable energy produced than carbon and coal by 2025. And nobody's really talking about this. So I think there's a lot of progress being made, but it's really important to have a structured approach. And that's why business architecture is such a paramount discipline, to be able to explain complex topics in a simple way.
Yeah, and I like the word architects that you just used a lot, Niklas, also from the IT architect's perspective, but also the business architecture perspective, because sometimes we explain our jobs as sustainability architects. So that must be the match between these three disciplines. And if we think about what architects are, then that's how we describe our job. If we look at architects for buildings, for example, constructing buildings, the architects usually don't know or they can't, for example, build the roof themselves. Yeah, that they're experts out there for doing this, but they know what has to be done, what needs to be done in which order, and what's the plan, and who does that need, and what competences do they need, and which time phase to get the building right in the end. Yeah, and that's probably what architects are about, and what we are as sustainability architects. So we all look at what are the right tools we need, the right methods, the frameworks at the right time for the right people, and getting responsibilities right to make that work in the end. Yeah, to produce what we want to produce. Yeah, and that's probably what unites us, kind of.
I can only echo both of what you said. It's literally like exactly what I would have said. You know, to me, it's we're people that are in a position to see the organizations holistically. And I think silos are a big challenge in sustainability. Silos within an organization and silos across organizations. So we can help to bridge that for the benefit of sustainability. And it's also that that structured thinking, as you're both saying, what are the approaches at the right time? Because I find that intentional design, blueprint, structured thinking is not natural to everyone. But you know, why spend time doing archaeology and recreating these things? We have real problems to solve. Let's get this stuff in place quickly and use it for the purpose of you know the greater good. And I also think with the heart print as well, I think there's a bit of maybe altruism is a little too strong, but we want to do what's best for our organization. We want to serve and we want to do what's best for society. So I think we also have the drive to do that as well.
That's very well put. I agree with all what you said. So let's maybe take a look at something else. Daniel and Niklas, well, and Whynde, of course, invited to share your view on this as well. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, that's something that we somewhat dealt with several times throughout the previous episodes, and also today with what you shared at the very beginning, Daniel. So let's take another maybe closer look at this, well, as it relates to sustainable IT. Yeah? So how is sustainable IT linked to the UN SDGs? Are there any particular SDGs that sustainable IT primarily impacts, well, in the positive case, well, would help us achieve? Any insights to share on this?
I would say it links to every SDG. So you could find use cases for any SDG in all 17 in the end. One thing I need to think of is if we look at renewable energies and where do we need them? For example, in Germany, we have the issue that we have a lot of renewable energies in the north because it's close to the oceans, the seas, where we have a lot of wind, and we need to transport that energy to the south in Germany, where we don't have the wind. So all of this planning on one hand and operating energy networks needs a lot of IT management, IT planning, IT software simulations as well. When does what kind of energy level is being required by which industry? What are the industry, the big industry centers in Germany? When do they need the power, etc.? Just one single example, SDG 7, for example. Yeah. So I think there are a lot of or basically, you can map the SDGs to a lot of use cases, as this particular example shows. So Niklas, maybe you have additional ideas, but that's kind of my feeling. I could find and map any IT use case to one of the SDGs or vice versa.
Yeah, For sure. I might just call out a few. For example, the number 6, clean water and sanitation. I mentioned that on the impact on AI and the increased water consumption that we're also seeing, and that a lot of companies in the foreseeable future is going to be under a lot of water stress as well. It's not only energy stress. So the other one that I think is a bit concerning is the responsible consumption and production, the SDG 12, which the world economy as it is today is 93% linear, and only 7% is actually circular today. So obviously you can look at it as a great potential, or that we are lagging behind quite dramatically. I think there are a number of black swan events going on at the moment with shortages of resources, trade wars and the wars and so forth. So I think you're also seeing this paramount shift where sourcing strategies are changing. They're looking for non-virgin material and so forth. But also one of the challenges is also to make sure that this supply chain of non-virgin material is reliable and that you can get enough material to also produce, so to say. So I think we are in this trough of you have to make that jump, so to say, because you have the conversation with some of the big players like Apple and Dell and so forth. But their challenge is rather that they have the capability to actually create new computers with 100% renewable aluminum. They have found a way to keep sort of the characteristics of recycled aluminum now with the magnetic characteristics, for example. But they don't have enough material flow, for example, to be able to have a reliable supply chain for that. So I think we are in this leap where we need to really get there. But I think for sure, with 55, 60 billion devices going to be in circulation in a few years, I'm sure we're going to have to rethink our circularity approach, because people are not going to be able to afford these devices, so to say.
Okay. Whynde, you mentioned different business architecture domains at the very beginning of your presentation. Yeah, like for example, well, capabilities, value streams, and a few more. Can you maybe elaborate a little more on what it is that those core business architecture lenses can bring to the table to help enhance sustainability in organizations as enabled by the use of IT, as opposed to, for example, other lenses that are out there, like business processes or whatever?
Yeah, happy to share some thoughts, and then others add as well. But I think the capability is at the heart of it, because it's that sort of non-redundant piece, right? If we do customer information management, we list it just one time, where process is going to use those capabilities multiple times, right? So what we're trying to do is streamline around reusable components so we can reduce the applications, and we can rationalize our data around that as well. So I think that's why the big emphasis on capability, and then something like process or a higher level value stream will put those capabilities into context, so we know where do they need to be used, which tells us stakeholders that we're touching. It also might tell us what we need to build, or does something truly work across all those scenarios or not. So I think that's the key bit. And the other is that the capability in particular, it is the one thing that connects to everything else, right? So if we are planning to enhance a capability, or it's necessary for strategy, if we look at that, we can see everything connected, and not just the IT, but the process and the stakeholder and the regulations and the products it's enabling. So it is really key to change as well as design.
Okay, thanks, Whynde. So maybe final one to reflect a little on what we heard today. So as we learned, with sustainable IT, it's about, well, IT assets themselves being, well, hopefully sustainable. It's about IT assets enabling an organization's overall sustainability. Well, and it's also about getting sustainability embedded in an organization's IT practices as a basis for all of this, right? So this will have something to do with the way, and well, Whynde, you kind of touched upon this with one of the final slides that you showed, yeah? Will have something to do with the way an organization defines its IT strategy, makes IT investments, sources IT vendors, and so on. Yeah? So could a general shift towards more sustainability in an organization's IT practices indeed be supported by the use of business architecture? Are there maybe any final thoughts on this?
Maybe I'll just jump in to let Daniel and Niklas have the last comments. I certainly think the answer is yes to that. And you know, business architecture as a continually maturing discipline, I think can also get a boost from the desire for sustainable IT and sustainable organizations from top to bottom. So I think there's it not only helps to enable that, I think it helps business architecture. And I think together I actually see sort of a triad here of business architecture, sustainable IT, and sustainability. I know we've talked in the past, but all three of us are trying to do similar things. We can help each other, add credence to the cause, and really help our organizations think holistically and intentionally about everything that they do in this space and otherwise.
Anything to add to this? Otherwise, I would say it might already be time to conclude. So, Whynde, Niklas, Daniel, are there any final thoughts, very final thoughts that you'd like to share, general ones? Anyone keen to leave a takeaway message with all who joined us for this session today?
I think for my key message usually is that you don't require a 3-5 year strategy either, so to say. That the important thing is to get started, and if you really need to get started and you're really struggling to understand where can I get 80% of the benefits for 20% of the work, I would really recommend to do a baseline. Do a baseline of your existing infrastructure and your landscape. And depending on your business environment, it is going to be different, but at least that will give you sort of a starting point. And from that, you can decide in terms of how you can connect that to your business architecture, your future direction of travel, but then not to make the scope too big, and then focus on the 2-3 things that's really going to make that impact, so to say, when it comes from a sustainability perspective. So start with your baseline, understand that, and design your direction of travel.
And just one addition, and use the methodology of the materiality assessment to find out what the big points are. That's my final conclusion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Whynde, Niklas, and Daniel. I think it was a great session. I very much enjoyed the discussion with you. There was so much in this session to learn from, I would say. A huge thanks for this. Thanks to everyone for joining us today, and I hope to see you again another time. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.